Hello, welcome to Baltic World. My name is Crispin. Today we're going to discuss a new security cooperation agreement between Sweden and the Nordic countries aimed at deterring aggression in the Baltic region. We have an article which we'll go through and discuss at length. In the meantime, if you find value in these discussions, please like and subscribe and consider sharing these videos. It helps grow the channel a ton, and let's get into it. So from Reuters, it says, Sweden will sign a defence cooperation agreement with Norway and Denmark this week to counter a deteriorating security situation in the Baltic region. Sweden, which is not a member of NATO but enjoys close ties with the bloc, is rebuilding its military after decades of neglect as a result of growing tensions with Russia in the Baltic region. Now, we have a video about the dramatic increase in Swedish defence spending, which we released last year. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Quotes from the defence minister from Sweden says, if there is a crisis situation, we will be considerably better prepared in that we will have coordinated our planning in this region, Hultqvist told TV24. In practice, we will be able to react more quickly. He said that the combined resources of the three countries would help deter a potential antagonist. Sweden has boosted military spending, including agreeing to buy Patriot missiles from the United States, and deepened its military cooperation with NATO and neighbouring countries like Finland in recent years in response to heightened tensions with Russia. Quote, we know that Russia is prepared to use military power in order to achieve its political goals and aims, Hultqvist said. We are deepening our cooperation with other countries in the region precisely in order to raise the bar in preventing disruptions and crises. There is a lot to talk about with this because significantly, Sweden is now on the front line when it comes to tensions with Russia, whereas previously during the Cold War, that position was sort of occupied by West Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. If you think about the increasing enlargement of NATO that has now gone right through the Baltic states to the Russian border, the most likely military contingency is a Russian invasion of the Baltic states. Now, to that end, we have a fantastic new video coming out in the next few days, specifically on this. There's been some developments in the United States around defending the Baltic states, so stay tuned for that. But this has significant implications for Sweden. So during the Cold War, Sweden remained neutral, wasn't a member of NATO, just like this article says. It did have secret clandestine cooperation with the United States. The Americans provided Sweden with all kinds of secret spyware, listening devices. And there's some fantastic stories from the archives during those decades where Sweden would learn some juicy things that were happening in the Soviet Union using technology provided to it by the United States, but then would have to make a decision whether to share that information with the United States because they didn't want to precipitate any crises that might result from it. With regards to this, any invasion of the Baltic states would require Swedish airspace to respond, and this is key to NATO war planning in this area. So let's say, for example, the Russian military moves into Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and NATO, of course, then responds. Well, the most important thing is to have occupation of Swedish air bases to run 24-hour sorties across the Baltic Sea to prevent Russia from being able to present the West with a fait accompli, i.e., if Russia manages to invade the Baltic, take territory right to the Baltic Sea, fortify its positions, it's going to be incredibly difficult to retake that through amphibious assault by Western NATO allies. The most important thing is for the West to be able to basically bomb the hell out of any Russian advances from Swedish air bases in order to maintain a defense posture that is able to repel a Russian invasion. Now, the Russians aren't stupid. They know this. They know this perfectly well. So Sweden is neutral, technically speaking, when it comes to NATO and Russia, but that is no longer possible. It's a bit like, Norway during the Second World War. Norway was kind of tried to be neutral, but then was still invaded by the Germans to deny access to the British. Well, the same is true for Sweden today. Any invasion of the Baltic will also mean that Russia attacks Sweden because Russia will seek to destroy all Swedish air bases throughout the country to prevent any kind of NATO counterattack using those launching facilities. This is also a significant contributor to how the INF Treaty became defunct. So the INF Treaty is the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. It was signed between the United States and the Soviet Union in the 1980s during the kind of a rapprochement towards the end of the Cold War between Reagan and Gorbachev. And what that did is it prohibited either country from fielding missiles with ranges between 500 and 5,500 kilometers. This was specifically designed to stop Europe from becoming a nuclear battleground, right? Let's say the Soviets invaded West Europe responds with nuclear weapons, the Russians respond the other way, and that begins a nuclear conflagration. So both sides agree to remove those missiles and the delivery systems most useful for those contingencies. Now, Russia had been violating that treaty from at least the mid kind of 2005, 2006 onwards as it fielded new Iskander ballistic missiles. These are mostly conventional missiles with ranges of over 500 kilometers, specifically designed to be able to destroy, Western European, Northern European targets from Russia. Iskander missiles being particularly useful, for example, attacking military air bases. However, this directly violated the INF Treaty. Now, for a while, the Americans pretended this wasn't happening. They sort of said, yeah, well, and then when they did acknowledge it, they said, well, yes, but Russia's mostly worried about, China and India because they're not parties to this treaty, which of course they're not, and therefore we don't need to get too upset about it until it became like overwhelmingly obvious what all these weapons were for. They were being constantly tested. There was a new Russian war game designed with an invasion of the Baltic states that ended with a nuclear attack on Krakow in Poland. So these things were constantly leaked in the press, and eventually the United States confronted Russia and said, look, unless you stop this, we are withdrawing from the treaty, and then both sides subsequently did. This has also benefited the United States because with the rise of China and America now being fully focused on its potential peer competitor, it doesn't want to be tied down by treaties that only exist between itself and Russia that don't constrain China in any way. So this is also helping the United States. The US is also trying to convince the Japanese to host new such missiles of America on its territory. This is deeply controversial in Japan as it heads into an election. But when it comes to Sweden, they now know that neutrality is no longer an option. Even if they wanted to, any Russian attack on the Baltic is also going to result in a mass attack on Sweden. Sweden has also reinforced and militarized Gotland Island that exists in the Baltic between Sweden and the Baltic states. And Russia definitely has war plans for taking that by amphibious assault in the event of a contingency in northeastern Europe involving the Baltic region. So Sweden, recognizing that it is a target, irrespective of what it might have preferred, is deepening its security cooperation with other Nordic countries that realize that they too would be under threat from any such eventuality. Also, the lack of defense spending in NATO is quite shocking and something that Sweden is trying to make up for with partnerships in the Nordic region. So, for example, Germany only spends 1.2% of GDP on defense. France is below the 2% threshold as well. Most other countries in Europe are. There is consistently low polling in Western European countries when it comes to defending the Baltic states. And the fact is that with the rise of China, the United States is perennially focused on the Western Pacific, Indo-Pacific region and will not be increasing its deployments in Europe. Far from it, it will almost certainly be drawing them further down from Germany and other places. So it really depends upon other countries in the region to step up and strengthen deterrence, get some high-end support from the United States, but really rely on the Europeans to defend Europe. So Sweden is apprehending this new security environment in which it is now a significant player. It hasn't yet joined NATO formally. It probably doesn't need to do that, and it likely increases its flexibility if it doesn't. Also, NATO enlargement, there's significant question about how much appetite there would be for that. They've already included sort of North Macedonia and Montenegro. So others are, NATO enlargement is kind of spreading through the Balkans, but Russia already feels hemmed in by NATO, and the Americans are very likely to try and improve relations with Russia, despite the incredibly toxic rhetoric in Washington about Russian interference, the Mueller investigations, all of that sort of stuff. America will try and tease Russia out of China's orbit, and Russia, for its part, is likely to want to do that as well, because Russia, at the moment, it has a very close quasi-alliance relationship with China, but largely that is because it must have that. It doesn't really have many other options. Whereas if Russia continues to go down this path, it will end up being the absolute proxy of China, and will do things that China wants it to do rather than what's in Russia's national interest. And we're seeing that already with Lithuania, the pressure that Beijing is putting on Moscow. Lithuania has this spat with China over the fact that Lithuania has improved diplomatic ties with Taiwan, donating all kinds of medical jabs and things to Taiwan as well, and opening diplomatic offices. Now, the Chinese have, of course, stopped importation of Lithuanian products and are trying to get Russia to do the same. Lithuania-China trade is low, whereas the trade between Lithuania and Russia is significant. So Russia doesn't have a bone in this fight. It doesn't care about Taiwan, doesn't want to get into a fight with Europe over it. But if Russian dependency increases on China, then that is the result. There is a contingency whereby China invades Taiwan, and Russia then opportunistically invades the Baltic states, in which case significant amount of resources will be required from the Nordic countries, Sweden in particular, in order to slow that advance and allow other regional allies to come in and help. The NATO war planning involves kind of a rapid response force within 48 hours, and then kind of, over the next couple of weeks, a counter-invasion force to drive back Russian aggression. All of this is giving military effect to plans that have been in place for a long time. There's still much to be done. Western Europe absolutely needs to lift its game, improve defence cooperation with the Baltic, just like Sweden is, increase its own defence spending and so forth. But this new security agreement is a significant step in that direction. We do have more on defending the Baltic states. As I said, stay tuned for that video. That'll come out the next day or so, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much. Goodbye.